As a researcher, I've always been driven by the power of narrative. Stories and storytelling is decidedly human. Many of us will have fond memories of being read stories before going to sleep, or the image of reading a book in front of a fireplace in wintertime is something we can relate to. And this power of narrative works at two levels, I would say. So there's the story inside the book that the author spins at you, let's say, cover to cover. And there's the way we look at these books, the story we tell about these books. And you'll notice that some of these books might end up in your library because you like the story that the author spins at you cover to cover. But some of these books might not make it into your library because of the story we tell about these books, like they've fallen out of fashion or they are ill appreciated for all sorts of reasons. And my research works at both these levels. So what I do is I look at 16th, 17th and 18th century texts from South Africa, basically written by the settlers that came here, right? And I see what story they spin and how they fit into the narrative of history as we tell it to each other. Many of these texts that I work with are in the libraries of the National Library of South Africa in Cape Town, special collections in particular. And there is also the VOC, the Dutch East India Company archives at the Cape Town Archives and Record Services, where many of these documents that were written or compiled by officials but also private persons in the 16th to the 18th century, where these are being stored. I'd say there's various aspects to the impact of the research. Maybe first off, let me say that these texts spring from a world in which the nation state as we know it today was not as clear-cut as it is maybe in thinking about identity, nationhood in today's world. Now these texts that are in the Cape Town archives and libraries for a long time we've been trying to frame them in terms of nationality, like do these texts belong to Dutch national literary history or rather South African literary history? And neither side was too keen to touch these texts and appropriate them into their historical narrative because of socio-political considerations, but also because we felt, and this is the important aspect for me, that if you want to read texts that predate, let's say, the concept of a nation and a nationality, then we should work with a different framework and approach these texts differently. And that, I think, is one very important aspect also in today's globalizing world. As we transgress these borders of nations and as other aspects become more and more important, like issues of migration, I think these texts that actually predate concept of nationness can be very important in showing us how to deal with these impacts of aspects of a globalizing world. So last year we've been working together, students from Utrecht University and students from Noordwes-universiteit, in like a virtual online collaboration where our students got together online and focused on these texts, and we asked them the question, what would be the relevance for you of looking at these texts today as a citizen of a global world? And this for the students was fairly interesting in the first place because they realized that both sides realized that on the other side of the world there is people that are dealing with a shared history, but they're asking different questions from the way they look at these texts. So they've been framing these texts differently historically, so to say. The Netherlands have been looking at this history differently from South Africa. And the students felt that in today's globalizing world there is a mutual new ground to be found, and so they entered into that conversation on the basis of this text. Now, what I'm doing at Northwest University is I'm a researcher with the School of Ancient Languages. So we're looking at 17th century Latin, which is something that many people, if they think about Latin, they think about the ancient world, right? The Greeks and the Romans. But there was also a lot of Latin written at a later date, which is an interesting expansion of the syllabus that is particularly relevant to the Northwest University. The same holds for the Department of Dutch and Afrikaans, or Afrikaans and Dutch, I should say. Where there's renewed interest in a period of history like the 17th and 18th century, which has for a long time been disregarded. So we're trying to find a new niche with the students to provide them with historical background to their current circumstance.